Hi, and welcome to this Lenten talk. I'm here in my study at the Rectory of St. George's, at home like most of you because of the coronavirus lockdown. The community of St. George's have been reading through Walter Brueggemann's devotions for Lent. This being the fifth week in Lent, I thought of discussing what could be a moral and theological response to the COVID-19 outbreak. And understanding that at this stage it's very premature, and only later we will have more holistic and exhaustive discussions about it. But I think it's an important question to ask at this time, as many are, as to how do we make sense of this time? How do we justify it? And perhaps, interestingly, how and who do we blame? What's been trending on social media is this idea and question as to who is the real virus? Many people responded by saying it is in fact humans. They're the ones who are exploiting nature and earth. And as a Christian, I can to some extent agree to that because of the fundamental Christian doctrine of original sin. In Romans chapter 8, the Apostle Paul writes about this in saying that the whole of creation is groaning like a woman in the pains of childbirth for the revelation of the sons and daughters of God. In that verse, we're already seeing some kind of moral hierarchy of value. And this idea of original sin is then further developed by Luther and Calvin, and a good resource on Calvinism is this book, the author being Micheal Horton. A very good book and a very good author on a balanced perspective on Calvinism. And Luther and Calvin wrote in saying that the very will of humans are bent towards evil. And so they may actually be unintentional and yet still do evil. I think a lot of that also stems from systemic ignorance in how we live our lives. If I switch on a light, I am pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere because of the burning of fossil fuels and how we are form part of the system of how we live, and historically how we are generating power and doing productivity and production. The point of intentionality is important, especially when we consider our legal systems and what constitutes as being criminal. In order for something to demand a verdict of criminality, it has to be knowledgeable negligence or intentionality about a criminal or wrongful act. In this instance, I think what's more evident is that how humans are just intrinsically out of balance about out of balance with nature and perhaps even with its own society. If we look at, for example, population density, and how people are migrating to urban centers. Now again, this is not the result of necessarily their own choosing, but because of systemic problems in our economic world. And this results in that we're putting a lot of strain and pressure on nature, and there's indication that COVID-19 could have evolved from the particular pressure that humans have put on nature and on animals. And when we look at the global impact that COVID-19 has had and is having, when we speak about sort of these meta terms, we have to consider that we speak in eschatological and apocalyptic terms. And in that, there is an end. And it seems like humans will inevitably cause its own destruction and the end of its environment. And that, of course, is specifically a premillennial eschatological view, but nonetheless something that's reverberates some of this idea of original sin. And the question that people are probably asking when we speak about these theological aspects is that what's God's role in this? Is God allowing this? Is this pushing towards a particular trajectory? And is God controlling nature, which has its own moral implications, in order to engage and get a message across to humans? And whilst humans have this propensity towards evil, I wouldn't call it necessarily human nature. I would rather just say it's evil, the evil nature within humans. And whilst humans have this nature, so to speak, within them, humans are also very critical of themselves, critical about their contributory roles in the destruction of the environment. And fundamentally, humans have this desire to continue its species. Hence why there's such explorations of worlds and habitats that could be colonized beyond Earth. In this understanding, this is that we do place a lot of value on humans, on our the survival of the human species, and in that it has an implication on how we stratify our moral value system. In our legal system, even now, the value of a human life is definitely much higher, for example, of animal life, and how one can take and should take moral decisions in terms of a court of law. But is this actually nature's way of self-correcting? Now, when I say that, I think we also need to understand that we are living in a particular time in history, and that COVID-19 has an impact on our lives right now when we are having a particular environmental impact on the world. Saying that, plagues such as the Black Plague in the Middle Ages had a much greater devastation on a group of people, the population of Europe, killing 75% of the population at a time when humans were living in much greater balance and sustainable balance with nature than now. But unfortunately, they didn't have the medical research, and so to combat it and understanding it, and so we may just say, well, that was bad luck. And so therefore, I am cautious to apply this personification of nature. We could do that though, but then I think we should talk about the metaphysical presence of evil and therefore of justice. N.T. Wright writes a very good response to that in this book. He's the former Bishop of Durham and Anglican bishop and very good author. And understanding how all these things are developing and speaking about the role of evil in the world, will human nature fundamentally change after the pandemic? I think personally, yes. I think in immediacy, there will be a different way of doing life. Long term though, I am less optimistic. I think that human nature will again revert to its typical conditions and characteristics. And so, saying that though, I think that we're living in a time when human moral consciousness is probably much more aware than ever before in history. Humans are, thanks to liberal democracies and liberal institutions, on a global level, much more morally aware of their actions than probably ever before in history, on a global scale. And saying that, we see that our economic and social systems are very fragile at this time. Our healthcare systems are very fragile. Our economic markets are very fragile, which may also prove and show that there is probably some problem in how we do business, and the heightened sense of competition within our global market systems. And yet, despite the fragility of our systems, the moral position that governments are taking is to actually sacrifice their economies in order to protect the most vulnerable of society, while COVID-19 actually only has a general mortality rate probably of less than 1%. Understanding also, I think that the practical implications is that if there should be a high volume of death in a society, that could result in some form of mass social disobedience. But that's very suggestive. And then I would ask the question, so how do we deal with this? And I would say what we need is actually truly the gospel. And I don't want to say that superficially. When I speak about the gospel, I want to break it down in that the gospel of Jesus Christ offers a new life. a new nature. It says, lay down the old life, the old nature, and take on the new nature. It speaks about a new set of virtues, a different kind of ethic. It even speaks about a new creation. It has all the right stuff, and yet it's also open to criticism. I think in the history of the church, we've seen how humans have been elevated disproportionately in their value over nature. But that's not a holistic perspective, I believe. I think that if we look at God's salvation plan, we see that this Edenic desire that God has is the restoration of all of creation and its redemption. In this week's readings from Brueggemaann, he quotes Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 31, wherein it says that God desires to enter into a new covenant with his people. At that stage, the nation of Israel had a complete destruction of all their civil systems. The Babylonians invaded, destroyed their cities, destroyed their economy, destroyed their civil systems, destroyed even their religious systems. It was a complete destruction of their culture to some extent. And so how do we relate that within the sort of bigger drama of our salvific pilgrimage? Paul extensively writes about this in his dense theological concept of grace versus law. It's dense because he takes it from the Judaic religious system and then reworks it into the Christian understanding, wherein he says that it's the law of sin and death that is opposed to grace. And that also that God is seemingly justified for allowing evil because of the existence of the institution of the law. And so if you read Paul's letter to the Romans, he speaks about that in the punitive measures of the law is the sort of natural consequences that humanity is bringing upon themselves as a result of their lifestyles. But here grace undoes, it counteracts the law of death at work and operative in our world and in our society. And Jesus Christ offers us the Spirit of God, which sets us free from the law. Understanding that when we speak about this in a contemporary culture, the gospel is not without controversy. In fact, I would say it even welcomes a measure of controversy. It's like in the book of Proverbs, it says wisdom is calling out in the streets. It says, come, let us talk about this. Let us have a debate. Because it seeks to be engaging with culture and with society. And as we speak about the gospel proclamation in this sense, the kerygma, I do believe that the gospel, and by implication Christians, will come under some form of persecution. Because evil doesn't want to be revealed for what it is. Evil flourishes in ignorance. And at this time, I think there's three things we need to do. We need to believe the gospel like never before. We need to live the gospel like never before. And we need to proclaim the gospel like never before. And in that, the gospel of the grace of Jesus Christ would offer an alternative to the lifestyle that we are living now.